All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Athenianos podcast. I'm joined by William Hamilton and Anshan Lee today. Obviously
Hello,
not in
everyone. Glad
person
to be back.
Hello, everyone.
because you guys are not here in person. Why don't you tell everybody where you're calling in from?
Oh, so I'm back in Milan. It's my hometown. Good to be back in Italy. Well, Ethan, you're in New York as well,
I'm in New
right?
York, yeah. And Anshan's
And
representing.
I'm still in Edinburgh, sadly.
He's
Sadly,
representing the hometown in Edinburgh,
yeah.
the base of operations.
Don't say sadly, Anshan.
Yes, a kind of lack of power to escape. So I'm still in the headquarters. I'm just saying, like, view from both sides. Someone will say it's very happy, someone will say it's very sad.
The topic we're going to talk about today is about addiction and its relationship to free will. And the question that I posed was, is an addiction another form of slavery? I.e., does it take away our freedom? And before you get kind of thrown back by the relationship, the word slavery, I think it's important to remember that the original word addiction is from the Latin word addictus. And the kind of as the story goes, the word came from the ancient myth of Addictus, which tells the story of a slave who was set free from his master, but because he became so used to his change, he wandered the land with his chains still attached, even though he could remove them at any point. So that's the origin of the word addiction. Now, obviously, it's evolved over time, and in modern usage, we don't really associate it with slavery. But the question we're kind of trying to get at is, how does an addiction alter your free will and your capacity to choose certain actions? So yes, that is the question we're trying to answer.
Yeah, so I'd say pretty uncontroversially, generally, even with the etymology of the word, is pretty closely tied to the concept of freedom and non-freedom. And so, just intuitionally, we all we kind of know there is some sort of connection. Like we're quite hesitant to say if somebody who's especially chemically addicted, chooses. I say that with the apostrophe marks, I guess, to shoot up heroin or something. We're much less inclined to ascribe, personal responsibility to him because we feel in some way that his freedom is diminished.
Right.
It does get interesting if we get into how exactly that works because, well, if we jump straight into it, I think the conception of freedom, which we use, is very important, not to get too political already in the beginning, but, some political groups will have this conception of freedom that is very, very basic, I guess. Well, they just say, freedom, and the only thing they mean is kind of they just focus on the negative freedom from intervention with the government or anything else. And as long as you have that, you're completely free. But I don't think that will tell the whole story of freedom. It misses most of the positive freedom side of it.
Could this? Well, okay. So just kind of a technical thing. This is from the Cleveland Clinic. There's two types. There's two types of addiction. There's substance use disorders and behavioral addictions.
Yeah.
And substance use disorders are mainly things like alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, hypnotics, this kind of thing. And the focus here is on how you become tied to this substance and are unable to withdraw from it, so to speak. And then the behavioral addiction is things like sex, gambling, I don't know.
Social media, actually.
Social media, yeah, that's a good example. Things and kind of the consensus is that the addictions are rooted in dopamine hits. So
yeah,
dopamine is the drug, right, that makes you feel good in your brain.
Yeah, it's to be more specific, it's the reward system specifically. It makes you kind of want to continue, gives you motivation, I guess. So
right,
it's the reward thing, and the reason why I guess it's so addicting is because from the way our bodies are designed when we were good old cavemen, there aren't many easy sources of dopamine. You'd have to work to getting the dopamine, and when you get it, it's like something that's evolutionarily advantageous to you. But nowadays, of course, it's like we can get all this stuff with a flick of our fingers, Well, one you missed in the psychological addiction is obviously food. Food is a big one, eating disorders. And eating food obviously releases dopamine because, we need to eat. But when food, especially high-calorie food, high-energy food, such as sugar, is so readily available, it's a bit of a problem because our bodies are designed to treat this as a rare occurrence when we get sugar because it's supposed to be a rare occurrence. But since we have it so easily, it kind of just overloads our dopamine systems and makes you unable to do what you really want to do, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that if it is when basically what we've discussed is from the material addictions which has been pointed out by Philip, and not by Philip but by William. Talking about the other side of the addictions, that is the non-material addictions. I'm hard to see how those things are really connected with free will, because if those things based on the reward system that, as you point out, that is dopamine addiction, I can't see that free will is also connected with dopamine.
Well, we were sort of getting to that. I guess with the chemical addiction part, it's obviously like a bit more straightforward. You'll see obviously the chemicals are affecting your brain in a certain way, which will force you, I guess. Force you is quite strong, but at least heavily incline you towards a certain path of action, which may not necessarily be the part of action you want to take. But the same thing basically applies to a more severe psychological addiction. I mean, you will feel physically and mentally compelled towards a certain course of action, even though, if you were in kind of a rational state of mind, in a long term kind of, I guess the average mental state of yourself for the past 2 weeks wouldn't have wanted to do this. But, just in that specific vulnerable situation, usually it's actually quite interesting. It's caused by random external stimuluses, which, you're not even aware of at the time, which just cause the brain mechanism to, I guess, request the dopamine spike that you're used to.
I mean, things like gambling, right? They say you only need to win once to get addicted because
90% of gamblers quit right before they're about to make it big.
But isn't gambling different from eating and sexual activities? Because gambling is obviously not a very ordinary or average or acceptable activity, whereas eating and sexual activities and human conditions, the human species. Yes.
Well, one, I think acceptable depends on where you are. If you're in Las Vegas, then the answer is certainly different. Addiction is very acceptable. And there's plenty of...
It's more like a social condition, or social political condition that you mean.
Yeah, but I think it's still like with food and sex, for instance, and all those things, again, the initial reason for the addiction is because they're things that are evolutionary advantageous. Obviously, food makes it survive, sex reproduces, like that. And I think gambling, at least, this may not be entirely correct, I might be spitballing, but it's probably the idea that, what you stand to gain from it is financial freedom, which is ultimately still kind of a survival thing, at least in our modern times.
You seek that, because there is that chance that you could, like you said, seek that financial freedom or have this huge sum of money that you can use to do certain things. and usually what happens is they in the initial thing they let you win like a very small amount. This is how you get hooked, because you think, oh, it's possible for me to win.
Yeah.
And you get that initial like high of winning, and then you keep going. And in reality, it's much harder to win after you've already won, and so you keep on going.
What's interesting in gambling? Sorry, what's
Yeah.
interesting in gambling is that actually it's not, you need both winning and losing. It's not like if you just win, for example, 3 times straight, for instance, you're probably going to stop there. Or at least you're much more likely to stop there because you're like, well, I've already won 3 times. Why am I going to continue going on? But as soon as you add losses into the win, it adds an element of unpredictability, I guess, like ups and downs. You lose and you feel kind of bad, but you're like, oh, okay, I might win the next one. I need to keep on going. It's sort of the volatile nature of gambling, which kind of makes it particularly prone to addiction. And I think the same thing applies to social media. I guess the most addictive thing of our time in social media is the reels. Spawned from TikTok, obviously, but they're all everywhere now. YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and whatever. But the reason they're quite addictive is because as you're scrolling through the videos, you'll get 1 or 2 good ones and then maybe 3 or 4 bad ones. But you keep on scrolling through the bad ones in the hope of trying to get the good one. Ultimately, like, whoa, that one was good. Maybe if I keep on scrolling, I'll eventually get the good one.
But even in terms of like the like stuff and the story, right? Like you may post one thing and you get like a high percentage of likes, and you're like, oh, I feel really good about this, and then you do it again and you get less, and you're like, oh, then you feel bad, and you do it again and you get less, and then you feel bad, and then you do it again and you get more, and you feel good, and it's that like roller coaster of emotions. And I think the way I see it is really anything can be an addiction so long as you have that high dopamine hit that drops, and so that leads you to continually.
The instant high as well. I think that's an important element of it. It has to be like a kind of instant spike high that you get from like not much work actually. Like sometimes it'll be chance. It might not be easy to get, but still like it's not up to you. Kind of you don't you don't have to put work in to do it to get.
And that's why things like crack are so addictive, because you have that immediate high when you take it, and so you can after it wears out, you lose that, and so you continually seek and crave that instant high.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the addictions, excluding substance abuse addictions, but a lot of the more psychological addictions are also they just act as kind of distractions. When people have anxiety problems, they don't know what they're doing. They're kind of like worried about certain stuff, and they just keep on thinking about it. Just accessing the easy source of dopamine kind of just distracts their mind from it for a brief period of time.
Isn't that actually 2 kinds of addiction that you guys are talking about? One kind of addiction is that some activity, certain type of activity cannot be stopped once it has been circulated. And the other type of activity is about rewards of dopamine. You guys are talking about social media and gambling in the beginning. Actually, it's hard for me to see there's any spiritual reward from this activity. In the beginning, you told that for gambling, it's about the material reward, and for social media, it's about eventually a hope to find a likable or a enjoyable content. It's hard for me to think that actually there's free will related towards those activities, because those activities is different from the other.
Okay, I mean, I can I guess introspect from certain of my own failings. I suppose I've definitely I think it's hard to not be addicted to some social media at this point. If you've managed to avoid it, honestly, I'm quite impressed. Well done. But I try to avoid. I like delete most of the media apps which specifically suck your time around. But I notice it when I was on these apps, the reels. I'm just like scrolling through, and I realize like I've just wasted all my time. This is not what I wanted to do. I'm kind of being deprived of my own freedom to do what I would want to do ideally. But it does sort of chip away.
You just
away at your freedom.
And sorry, to bring up one other thing, you mentioned like the difference between material and like spiritual kind of stuff.
Yes.
I don't think, the material things can be like a byproduct, but I think it really is chemically that you get addicted, because it's the chemical hit from the dopamine. So it's not necessarily determined by like, is it material? Is it, spiritual? Is it, some kind of psychological thing? I think the root of it is the chemical hit, and that's what leads you to be addicted. If that's how I understand it.
Okay, the mechanical hit. Because from my understanding, I'm thinking that free will is eventually a mental activity, and that is linked to the mind or to the spirit, and it's hard for me to think that for the material conditions that we really have the free will to determine whether we can escape from certain addiction or not.
Okay. Well, I think here is an interesting point that you bring up, actually, because when you think about things like social media, you think about things like tobacco industry, you think of things like even the food industry, where you have, the engineering of like potato chips to basically get you hooked on the taste and make you go
food is designed to be addictive as possible nowadays. Right. Yeah.
I think you bring up an interesting point where, when we're talking about like, slavery and the chains and whatnot, when you have industries and certain, people designing certain things to make you as addicted as possible to these products, kind of making you like a slave to the chemical addiction, let's say, and thereby addicted to the material thing. You are in a sense being like, yes, there's the slavery aspect in terms of, that's a loaded word, but in terms of your own personal free will, how it takes away your own personal free will. But in another sense, you could think about it as somebody else, by designing these things to make you so wrapped up in the chemical pursuit of their products or whatnot. You are, in a sense, they make you a slave to their products.
And how would you?
It's very insidious when you think about it. It's like, it makes most people enslaved to something, which I think we all can agree. It is a certain form of slavery. You're enslaved to your own mind, in a sense. But they do this without most people at least, without them even knowing that they're being enslaved by someone.
I mean, it's like a Foucaultian a panopticon, right?
The prison thing.
The prison where the prisoners think they're free, but in reality they're completely surrounded and they can't do anything.
But they think they're being watched at all times, which regulates their behavior, yeah.
Right. And so interesting, Asen's definitions, and how would you separate the addictive material and the non-addictive material? Because from my understanding, your criteria is based on whether you are guided or you are enslaved by some other people's discipline or by some other organization's ends. Then they would like to gain benefit from you or to let you lose free will to determine your own activity, either physical or mental activity. But just for an example, that we do eat every day and drink water every day. What's the difference between addictive towards sugar-related products and addiction towards meals? And why don't we say we are addicted towards lunch or dinner, just as we say you are addicted towards potato chips?
I mean, I think that gets a little silly. I mean, we can say you're addicted to oxygen right now because you have to breathe at all times. You're addicted to sleep because you have to sleep. No, I mean, clearly one of the different necessary functions that we have to do in order to live. and others are, we don't have to do them. We actively, not always, but we sometimes don't even want to do them, but we're like kind of compelled to do them by
And what if for someone
the will?
What if for someone the view that the dopamine production is a necessity for them? Then they think that they're necessary.
It's not. They're wrong.
It's not because Anshin, if I stop eating, I'm gonna die. I'm not gonna survive, right? If I stop eating for 6 months straight, I'm not gonna live. If I stop drinking water for 6 months, I'm not gonna live.
Of course. But you just mentioned that in some materials, in some substance addictions, there's people who have misuse of marijuana or misuse of opioids related products. They will say the same thing, that if they stop use of heroin or cocaine, they will die.
Right, but they're wrong. That's not the wrong. That's not. I mean, we can agree, right? That that's not actually true. You can live without marijuana.
So what's the criteria to judge the wrong and the true? There should be some criteria to judge either to judge the truth and the falsity of the activity.
Well, I think that's a scientific, biological question, right? I mean, humans need food and water to survive. They do not need, cocaine and cannabis.
Your criteria were based on a scientific investigation. That is either it is necessary for you to survive or not.
Well, look, if somebody comes out with credible scientific studies saying that humans need marijuana to survive, I'll read it. But until then, there's plenty of people who have lived without marijuana and cocaine. I don't know of anybody that lives without food and water. So,
well, an interesting question I actually thought about recently, leading up to this podcast, is the way we define addiction was mostly through spikes in dopamine, easily accessible, and whatnot. But how about where it's something that is healthy for you and it's even hard to get? So the example I thought was like exercise. Can you be, in theory, addicted to exercise?
You can, actually. And I think I personally know someone who's addicted towards exercises. And the point that I would like to make is, just as you said, that it's comparing both, that is something hard to be used to, as you point out, exercise, or something that is easily you're used to, like drinking water, go to sleep and eat food. Isn't that the case that we have already lost our free will in water drinking and meal eating and sleeping, those kind of basic activities? So I can conclude that you're saying that you are suggesting in one way or another that we don't have free will in controlling our body, such as water drinking, food eating, and sleeping. And you're debating about.
Well, I think this actually leads to a pretty nuanced discussion, which I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure on, because a lot of the times we think of free will as like a binary. Either you have it or you don't. You're free or you're not free. But it doesn't quite work that way if you think about it for a little bit. Like, there are clearly degrees of freedom. Some animals, let's say, are more free than others. I'd be willing to ascribe more free will to a chimp than to an ant. I don't know, And clearly,
ants are actually pretty smart. I would go with a cockroach.
Not as cockroach, I guess. Not as smart as chimps, though. And clearly, when you're a baby, you're not free, but somewhere along the line, you become more free. It's not like one day the baby just wakes up and he's like, oh, I have free will, as it's often memed about. Clearly, there is some sort of degree of freedom. And, that idea would sort of imply that unless we just coincidentally happen to be at the maximally free point, that would imply that it's theoretically possible to be more free than we currently are. What exactly that entails is, a bit out there. We don't know. I guess you could argue that the enlightened person, whatever you want to take that to mean in your own worldview, would be more free than the average person. But again, he'll still have obviously constraints that come just from the laws of physics. There are different there are ways in which this kind of falls apart, because it would be a bit silly to suggest that I am less free because I can't, break the laws of physics. That just seems silly.
You remind me of a very interesting. You guys know who Bob Dylan is?
Yeah, the musician.
You could enlighten.
He's a musician. It's very famous for his songwriting, but he has a song, and at the end it says, "And my friends from the prison, they ask unto me, how good does it feel to be free? And I answer them most mysteriously, are birds free from the chains of the skyway?" So it's, you had me thinking about that line, because it's all about, yes, you're right. Free will is not, a binary and a non-binary, because we're all not free from, like you said, the laws of physics. I don't have the will to just fly away right now into the sunset. I can't become invisible, as much as I would love to be.
Well, because I guess if you think about sorry, I could just intervene a second. What kind of being more free means generally when we say free, it's like more options. That's the reason why addiction would make you less free, because your number of options are limited. And so I guess the maximally free point would be, you have infinite options, but like, what does that even mean? That just sounds like, nonsense. We can't really make sense of it.
I mean, to come back to the question of addiction and the way I was kind of thinking about this was a psychological freedom more so than a material freedom, because
it's hard for me. Yes. Please continue. Sorry.
Well, because obviously it's not the same thing as if you were bound by chains and shackles and you physically could not move, and the physical constraints were there. When you're addicted, you still have, in some degree, you have physical freedom. You can go somewhere. Nobody is holding you to the ground. But what you think about psychologically, I think, when you're addicted to certain things, are in some sense controlled and fixed. And to me, that is where you do have a strong loss of free will.
Well, I think this goes back to what I was saying before about, the positive and negative freedom difference. Obviously, being chained physically to the ground and like impediment, that's like an obvious case of unfreedom, and that's negative freedom, freedom from other people stopping you from doing things. But that's not a sufficient description of freedom. One example I always like to ask is, say that we just like kidnapped you and drop shipped you in the middle of the Sahara Desert, no food, no water, anywhere, and you're just there. Like, are you free in any meaningful sense? I mean, no one's stopping you from doing anything, but ultimately you're free to die. I wouldn't say that's freedom in any meaningful sense of the word.
No.
So I think, William, your definition of the freedom is different from. I think if I can just rephrase Asen's saying in my own words, and if Asen could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that you are separating freedom in 3 degrees. There's basic physical law related freedom, that is, we are chained to water drinking and food eating and sleeping. You're also saying there's some kind of social consensus and political norms that we are chained by, such as that I can't think of anything that is very suitable to say, such as I'm not allowed to smoke marijuana in Edinburgh. I suppose it is not legal.
Sure. Even just gender norms, I guess that's a more banal one.
And there's also another degree, then the degree higher than those two. That is individual freedom. That you are free by yourself. You are not chained by your own bias and your own your your previous understanding and prejudgments or prejudice of something. But what you said,
I want to clarify. I don't think I don't think they're separate things. They're kind of different aspects of the same thing, which we call freedom. They're sort of, they're all beholden to the same concept of,
but what you said
freedom being the ability to choose between different outcomes. Hmm?
But what you said in the desert example, if I can call that the desert example, that is for a person, let's name it as for Mr. Chair, that he has an individual freedom. He has the highest degree of freedom, but he don't have the second and third degree of freedom.
He doesn't.
So actually, he's
the point. The point of the example is that he doesn't have negative freedom. He does have negative freedom, right?
He does have
but negative freedom isn't a sufficient description of freedom because we are not willing to ascribe freedom to him. There's clearly some way in which, if we define freedom as negative freedom, that the criteria for freedom is not satisfied. So what I'm just trying to say with that is that freedom is a lot more complex and nuanced than some people would have you believe, or it's just as long as no one is forcing you to do things, then you're free. That's a rather infantilized way of thinking of freedom.
So if there's some kind of material addiction, we are talking about how people could get freedom from the sufficient freedom from the negative freedom, in your words.
Well, yeah, I mean that's another reductio, I guess, if you wanna say that, because according to, if you just believe in negative freedom, there's no reason to say that people who are under addiction or any sort of mental illness really are less free. Hey, whatever, they're free. No one's stopping them from doing anything. They're free. But of course, I'm not going to call a kleptomaniac or anyone who has a mental illness as free as everyone else. Clearly, they have some sort of impediment to their freedom.
Can I use another? Sorry, are you going to? Asen, are you going to add something?
No, please go ahead.
I was thinking about the example that if, for instance, we believe that we just not believe, we imagine a society that if you would like to get a job in that society, for instance, to work as a civil servant or to form a small business by yourself, you need to go to some kind of drinking party or symposium that you have to drink with other bodies. But alcoholic products is a very addictive product, and it's very easy to have addiction towards alcoholic related products. In that kind of scenario, that is either you drink and you can go into the society, or you do not drink and you withhold yourself, that is, you draw yourself out of that society. And in that kind of case, some people would say it is sufficient for you to be as a member of the society, because human beings are eventually a social animal, and you can't live by your own. So if you want to get into that society, you have to drink alcoholic products. And in some cases, people get addiction from the alcoholic products. Then how would you say?
I think this is an example where your freedom is going to be limited either way. So what you're saying, I think, basically is that in order to be properly free, you need to join a society because you need to be with people to satisfy your needs to make you more free, la-di-da. But by joining the society, you relinquish some parts of your freedom by getting addicted to substances and at least being compelled to certain behaviors which you may not want to do. So, I think this is just a case in which you're going to be less free than the maximally possible, I guess, state either way, right?
Then what if we change the alcoholic products to cocaine? Just imagine a hypothetical scenario that if I would like to join...
that doesn't change much because cocaine is chemically addictive, but I think that the point is still that you're being compelled to do a certain course of action. Now, if you already wanted to do that before joining society, then that doesn't infringe on your freedom because that's still part of your desires. But if you're on the fence or actively didn't want to do that, then clearly you're desires, and your freedom is being infringed in some way.
Anshin, I have a question for you. In this alcohol symposium example, when you laid out these three versions of freedom that you laid out, where you laid out the I don't remember the first one, but there was like the social norms, and then there was the individual freedom. Oh, the first was like physical, like
basic needs, like you said.
Basic needs.
The physical.
Right. So is this example? Would you consider it a social norm, an infringement on the social norm freedom, or would you consider it an infringement on the individual freedom?
Actually, that's why I like to use example, because I don't think I have used it in a very clever way. I think it's about both freedom. So definitely it's a social norm, and it will as William said, from one side and the other side. But I also think it's some offense of individual freedom, because your individual aim and achievements, and also your individual will be damaged by some addictive activities. There's actually no ways to separate the individual freedom from social norms and political activities.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the divisions between the different types of freedom is more for linguistic convenience and like helpfulness. Obviously, they're still referring to one concept. There's not going to be like a strict, even just between positive and negative freedom. They refer to the same concept but kind of different aspects to it, but there's never going to be a strict line in which, certain things are just one thing or the other. Obviously, it's still just for convenience, but they refer to the same concept, and I think they're different aspects which we need to take in mind when trying to describe the concept of freedom.
Then why would people will happy? Then you would definitely happy to be a friend with a person who is addictive towards discipline, addictive towards physical exercise, addictive towards reading, addictive towards all the virtuous activities, all the virtuous norms that you could think about, towards honesty, towards soundness. But you don't like to be a friend with some person who's addictive towards alcoholic products, or addictive towards.
I mean, that raises the question.
Let's take an extreme example.
Whereas, can you even be addicted to virtuous activities? It seems like that's at least not obviously true or false. If maybe you're just doing, if it's like just exercise that you're doing, then maybe you can be addicted. But I think if you can't be addicted to exercise, helping people, doing this and that, I think that's a bit too many addictions to handle. At that point, you're just like a normal person, a virtuous person.
I would say like there's some disease, I forget the name, where you like exercise to the point where it's unhealthy because you're like, but you want to be like super skinny.
Oh, like body dysmorphia.
Body, yeah. And so
that's not necessarily addiction to exercise.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. It's
yeah.
I mean, maybe it's addiction to a certain like I don't know, body, like a certain body frame.
Yeah, because that will verge into like eating disorder as well. That's going to be part of it.
But and in that case, maybe exercise is a byproduct of your addiction to a certain thin like thing.
But in that case, yes. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
I was not.
I was going to change the subject, so.
Yes. We can jump to the next session.
Well, I was just going to say, if you guys are okay, I wanted to kind of go back to what we were talking about when we were discussing the kind of from who does if we can agree that your freedom and your free will is unhinged by addictions, who is actually doing the unhinging? Is it the person who gets addicted to these things, like alcohol, like caffeine, like sex, or is somebody else imposing this can we actually assign responsibility to another person, another actors who are actually, in some sense, enslaving you to these
I think you
things?
can have it both ways with like, the eating or social media one, either one. The slavery is ultimately to yourself. I guess you're enslaved by your own mind in a sense. It's your own biological limitations and processing that is making you less free. However, that doesn't mean we can't assign responsibility to someone else. Like for instance, if I see two people that absolutely hate each other, and then I pass by and like give one of them a gun, and he proceeds to shoot the other person with it, even though it was on him, I'm still responsible for that. I knew what was going to happen, and I still gave him the gun. I think responsibility can be divvied up. I mean, in the addiction case, obviously, we can take that a bit further and say that the people who are addicted are not responsible at all, right? Because they're, it's not really their fault in a sense.
Well,
that's a very brave statement. Yes.
Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, you have like, I think with the kind of, and it's getting into like AI a little bit, with the advancement of AI, I think what you're going to see is the capacity for external actors to make their products more and more addictive. It's going to be drastically increased.
I'm a little bit lost in this part.
Well, they already do it now with social media. Sorry, I mean the reason that social media is very addictive is because of the algorithm, which is essentially an AI, which gives you content that is designed in order to make viewer attention as high as possible. So there's certainly a connection which I can see.
Oh, I was thinking about some kind of material substance addiction, but well, yes, I think
my point is that and you have things like the food like potato chips or tobacco, where it's engineered to make you as addicted as possible, and they are improving their not specifically with tobacco but in other things, they're improving their ability to make you addicted. So is there a degree element to this where some people, because their products are less addictive, but still have the ability or potential to have you addicted, and then some people's products who have a high or incredibly addictive, who they have a high potential to have you addicted to this? Can we say that there's a degree of responsibility based on how addictive people engineer or make their products?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly going to be like maybe more or less blame, but it's always a little tricky when you're trying to assign, percentage of responsibility. It gets a little bit goofy. Morality isn't quite so mathematical and numerical as that. I think you can certainly say in some situations it's obvious, like someone's more responsible than another person. But if you get into like the specifics where it's like this product is 2.3% more addictive, does it translate to 2.3% more moral gain? Like, well, we know.
What about things like this is gonna get me in trouble, but what if we talk about things like OnlyFans? Right.
Porn addiction. I mean, that's sex addiction, sure.
But sex addiction, sure. But what about from the opposite standpoint? So not from the people who are addicted to OnlyFans, but
from the creator. Okay, that's.
I'm a little bit sorry. I'm a little bit lost about on this part. So, basically, William was saying that there's two kind of responsibilities. That is addiction from the producer and the addiction from the receiver. And you're saying in most cases that for the receiver, from your view is produced from the receiver side, and you think, well, the receiver still has its free will, but why it can't control, or it partially lost ability of its free will, is because the producer made something, and you're saying, and you're bringing the OnlyFans example towards William's argument, or you're opening a completely new case?
Well, okay. What I was saying before is if you think about like, let's go back to like physical slavery, right? So let's say somebody has chains in them, or if the chains are made of like string, let's say, that's a very light form of slavery because somebody can easily break out of the string and whatnot, But as it goes up in material, let's say it's like titanium, chains, and they're much tighter fit, and that's an even higher degree of loss of freedom. And I'm saying maybe an analogy could be drawn to how addictive people make their substances or products. And with the OnlyFans example, I was saying we were talking about yes, like porn addictions are a thing, and you can
but that's the receiver side.
People are addicted to using, but I wonder if you could also say that from
the producer side.
The producer side, people getting addicted to making content on things like OnlyFans.
So you're not talking about slavery. You're talking about master. You're talking about the governor, the despot.
I'm not. Can you clarify what you mean by
master? I'm thinking you're talking about two kinds of freedom. There's two kinds of free will because what we've been discussing about is how could we free ourselves from addictive products that is either material or psychological, mental. That is, we're talking things from the slavery side. And when you bring the OnlyFans example into our discussion, they said, how would people to free themselves from producing?
Wait, should we clarify what OnlyFans is?
Yes. I'm probably, that's why I'm a little bit lost.
Okay, it's a site where, like, it's essentially an independent porn site. So individual women can make their own porn and then post it, and people will pay.
Well, probably not only women, but yes.
Yes, but it's majority. I think it's majority women.
Yes, and you're talking about addiction to OnlyFans addiction that you're not talking about.
Well, because imagine this, right? Imagine you have a society, a state built up where the state allocates the highest, degree of the state controls the income in the industries, and they say that we will give the most money to sex workers. We'll give the most money to people who work in the porn industry, so they incentivize this thing. Or let's say they will pay people to sit on a stool and do cocaine all the time. Or we'll pay people. We'll pay people. Or what about this? We'll give people cocaine to do things like I don't know, mow a lawn.
It sounds like some kind of Babylonian dream. Yes.
No, but I'm saying like in that sense, could you say that because the state is allocating a reward, and and proportionate reward to the certain thing, that they are causing these people to become addicted to these certain actions because the way that they set up the reward system in their society?
Well, you can certainly be addicted to money. I think a lot of people are addicted to money in this sense, so it's not too dissimilar from what you're talking about.
My point is mainly like if the society is set up in such a way where the vast majority of money or the highest proportionate amount of money is allocated to a specific activity, such that people will get, addicted to this activity through money, then can you assign blame to the, like, quote unquote,
system.
organizers of the society or the system?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if it's done in such a clear, three people, a group of people in a room come up with the society, then those group of people are responsible. Otherwise, it would be a more systemic problem, which is more, I guess, realistic. It's not a select group of people that are responsible, but more it's just the system that's designed that way to fuck us over.
So I mean, let's say you had a scenario where, like, in the US or the UK or whatever, people were making consistently, 6 figures and more from, the porn industry. Could you say that in that case, we were talking, Anjan, you were talking about receiver and producer. Could you say that in that case, even the producers are addicted to the thing?
Yeah, I don't know if they're addicted specifically. It might be like the exercise we're talking about, where they're not actually addicted to making the content, but they're addicted to the money and making the adult content as a means to getting the money.
I think probably power is also a very addictive thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Power trips, that's.
And I'm not quite sure that you are really talking about then it is a political topic or a pornographical topic. No, well, let's say it's not, because I'm thinking that I think actually OnlyFans example is a quite good example. There's not only producer and receiver, there's also another invisible thing that we haven't that I think we haven't noticed so far. That is the platform, and you are linking the platform, the analogy, towards the government in power, and the.
No, I'm not saying it's the government. I'm just saying whoever is responsible for.
Right. Well, if we make this example a bit more, based in the real world, in the real world currently, the reason addictions, like especially gambling addictions and drug addictions and food addictions, I mean, I guess if you want to assign responsibility, capitalism is going to be one of the things that is responsible for propagating this. Obviously, a system can't actually be responsible, so it's more of a figure of speech. But certainly, capitalism rewards people who exploit other people's addictions. That should be quite uncontroversial, I think. Whether you like or dislike capitalism, that's, I think, pretty uncontroversial. And so I guess that leads into this discussion of how much you can blame a system. Do people prospering? Obviously, the casino owners are going to be morally responsible, But there is a certain attitude that you do see often, and it's the idea of don't hate the player, hate the game, which applies quite well in this situation. I personally don't buy it a lot, but some people do seem to.
Don't buy what?
That don't hate the player, hate the game. As in, no, it's not my fault for using the system to its logical advantage, which is to act immorally. It's the system, it's the fault of the system that exists. But I mean, I think using that excuse, you can kind of end up justifying a lot of pretty heinous stuff.
I mean, it's interesting with the gambling and the drugs and the other thing, because you have the creator, right? The guys sitting in the room who are either designing these drugs, designing these slot machines, whatever. Then you have the users. But like, where does what is the role of the actual thing, because it's not like the creator has a direct line to the user, or the addictor, let's say. If there's the intermediary of the slot machine, of the drug, of the actor.
Well, it's the product. It's more generally it's the product which people consume.
Product. But I mean, how of the social media thing, like how important, I guess, how important do you think is the product? Because, or in the sense of when you have this kind of, like we were talking about before, how you don't really know, like you're losing that freedom, or you're not really conscious of the fact that somebody else is doing this to you. How important do you think is the fact that you have this intermediary who is, or that is this kind of inanimate thing, or this passive thing?
Right. Well, the product is a thing you're addicted to, is the actual object of addiction,
Right.
You're not addicted to the person. The person just facilitates you getting the object of addiction.
But how important is the fact in getting the addiction, in starting the addiction, that the maker of this thing, or the creator, or the producer, is disconnected from the thing that you become addicted to?
I'm a little bit lost.
Well, I don't see what an example of the producer being connected to the object of addiction would look like. What does that even mean?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is when you have, like, let's say, you had the person, the producer, in some fantasy world, let's say that you had, I don't know.
Maybe you can exemplify with some previous example that we have already.
Well, okay. I mean, let's say you have like a cocaine factory, right? And you just had a cocaine factory, I don't know, and you could see the person making, talking about, okay, we're gonna, design this thing to make it as addictive as possible, for certain people. And we're going to try to alter its chemical thing, and we're doing all that. It's like an overt.
This is just like sales. Then I guess is the problem. I mean, it's again what we were speaking about. It's the reason why most of the addictive things are produced and sold in the first place is because it makes profit. If there wasn't a reason to profit it, and the whole point of making profit is to obscure the potential dangers from consumers. If there was no profit reason, then it's not like people would just open casinos for no reason and get people addicted.
Right.
People aren't just going to sell drugs for no reason. People aren't just going to give you shit food for no reason.
Right. But there's nothing
Yes.
There's nothing in the casino machine or the slot machine or whatever. Like, there's nothing in there that's saying, "Oh, I'm making myself as addictive as possible in order to, to get you addicted," right? Because it's just kind of this
the personal pronoun I. Do you mean the producer, or you're speaking as the product itself, like cocaine? If I'm a cocaine itself, and I speak, okay, it's the product,
right? As the product of himself, because I'm saying the control is such that.
Well, yeah, of course, if you had
maybe this is an obvious
all the information. I mean, the reason a lot of addictions happen as well is because of lack of knowledge, lack of information, right? If you had all the details, you'd be at least less likely to get addicted and less likely to continue.
Right. Maybe that's
I would say that
the first step of ending an addiction is realizing that you are actually addicted and it's having a negative impact on you. It seems like a trivial point, but it's it is often overlooked. That is an important stage.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. Is like maybe this is an obvious point, but I was just thinking like the fact that you don't actually, there's such a disconnect from the producer and the product could be a major factor in.
Well, yeah, that's how in places where drugs are legalized, I guess. The idea when people say legalized drugs, they don't just mean you can get drugs whenever you want in any situation. That's a little silly. Of course, you can just go to your local pharmacist and get heroin whenever. No one really says that, but it at least allows for there to be honesty between the consumer and the whatever he's consuming. At least make someone have all the facts before going into it, and they can make an informed decision. Because I mean, it's possible to be like a willing addict, if that's your goal in life, then go for it. But most people don't want to be addicted to heroin, and so, deserve to know everything there is to know about it before getting into it.
Right.
I would say it's very debatable on that topic, because maybe my point of view is there's no free will in human activities, because eventually there's not only producer, receiver, and the product. There's a platform in order to let those three things to perform, and the platform that in the OnlyFans example is the website, the OnlyFans website, and I think in daily life example, like cocaine, either you can get cocaine from the pharmacy or not, or other material. If stuff is humanity, that we human beings eventually cannot escape from humanity because we are human beings. So we are addicted towards we can't escape from addiction. Like even.
That seems straightforwardly wrong. We can't escape from the urge of addiction. We can't escape from, temptation, but we can escape the actual addiction.
You mentioned that we can put that if the governor can put some kind of governmental health sign on addictive products to say that this product can seriously damage your health, people will still get that product if they have some life troubles, if they have some mental problems.
Yeah, no, of course. It makes them, I think it would be fair to say it makes them less likely to, though, at least. And cigarette usage has gone down significantly since people know that cigarettes actually harm you and are addictive and everything.
But I believe there's eventually some other ways for people to get addictive products. That it's not total elimination of use of tobacco. They will develop some other use of some other addictive products, like social media. The example that you provided. And 15 years before
I think it's very hard to escape addiction, but I don't think it's in theory impossible. Though that seems a bit strange. I mean, it's
even if you know that some
saying, you can escape the temptation.
You can escape the temptation, but it's hard for me to see why addiction is related towards ignorance.
Well, because that seems pretty uncontroversial, as I was saying. If you know something is bad for you, and you know it's going to get you addicted. Like, say, now that I know, when I first got addicted to social media, I didn't think I was going to be addicted. I was just happily scrolling through, getting my dopamine receptors fried. Now I consume it less because I'm aware that it's addictive, and so I'm going to be very hesitant to see if there's any crazy new social media platform that is going to be, giving you all the best videos at once. I'm going to be a lot more hesitant because of knowledge. I know that it's addictive and that it's harmful.
And there's eventually that you are eventually not omniscient, and there's something that you are not aware of. So you can't.
Yeah, of course, I might be addicted to something else, but that's only a possibility. It's not a necessity.
You just haven't been defined as addiction yet. Like,
cocaine, can you give an example?
Heroin was invented as a medicine, and people use heroin to cure coughing. People use heroin to treat many diseases. But later scientific discovery, actually it's not later, I think heroin was invented in Germany, like in the early 19th century, and for the people who discovered heroin, they didn't realize it's addictive in the beginning, and they think it can be used as a medicine to treat certain diseases. And after several decades, the government finally illegalized the use of heroin as some addictive materials. So people in the beginning don't have the knowledge of the addictive of the damage of heroin, and people are using heroin as a medicine.
Is your point that addictions are what we classify as addictions are slightly driven by social norms?
No, I'm saying that we cannot know everything everywhere at every time. So eventually there's something that we do not know and we haven't qualified or list them as addictive products. And William says, if it is possible for you to be addictive to something, doesn't mean it's necessarily for you to be addictive towards something. If it's still possible for you to get away from addictive products, but I would like to argue that it's not possible for you to get away from addictive products because it's an either or problem. It's either there's no possibility or you are going.
If you live as a hermit, if you live as a hermit in the middle of not in the desert, if you live as a hermit in the middle of the forest and you just hunt and eat and drink all day, you're not going to be addicted to anything. You're fine. There's nothing there that's going to make you addicted.
I would be very skeptical about that example because tobacco leaves was before the invasion.
Okay,
from the European...
There's no access to tobacco leaves. There's no access to weed leaves. There's no access to anything. It's just normal grass, you know.
Anshu, can I just have a point of clarification?
Yes.
Are you saying that you can't escape particular addictions, or are you saying that you can't escape addictions? Period. Like we can't, like in general, we can't escape addictions.
I would like to say that both. For both cases.
Both cases.
The first one seems obviously wrong. Of course you can escape a particular addiction, you know? I mean, people who are addicted to heroin aren't always going to be addicted to heroin. The second one's a bit more up in the air, but I think even that it's more of a... If you do argue for it, it has to be on a more practical basis of, like, you know, as you were saying, we can't know anything, and there's an abundance of things that can get you addicted. But, I mean, I think theoretically you'd still have to say that, sure, you can, in theory, escape addiction.
Well, because you would say, for the first one, like William said, you would agree, right, that you can be addicted to alcohol, but escape, you know, that addiction. You could be addicted to, you know, smoking, but people can cure their smoking addictions.
I do not agree with that part. I do not agree with that part. I'm thinking that eventually, not eventually, I'm thinking that human beings are so fallible that we are determined to be addicted towards things, and it just happened accidentally.
Wait. So say I used to be addicted to alcohol. You know, I used to be a binge drinker, and now I've stopped. Do you think it is impossible for me to never drink alcohol again for the rest of my life?
No, it's not that case. I'm saying that addiction, as a particular addiction, you can never escape. Even it is possible for you.
I think you mean addiction more generally. That's what you're talking about, like general
addiction.
Even
it is possible for you to never drink alcoholic again in your whole life. It is not possible for you to not use materials or products to get you out of that addictional condition. You will always have the addictional condition in your mind that you would like to have a drink.
Just a point of clarification. Are you saying one, that even if you stop drinking alcohol after you've been addicted to alcohol, you're still in some sense addicted to the alcohol, even if you never drink alcohol again? Or are you saying that if you're addicted to alcohol, but you stop drinking alcohol, you are looking to fulfill that addiction that you've stopped because you've stopped drinking alcohol, you're looking to fulfill that addiction in some other thing. And because you've sought addiction in that other thing, you're in some sense still chained, or in some sense you haven't freed yourself from the alcohol addiction.
I think your second proposition just clarified your first, because there's two meaning of alcohol in your first proposition. You said the alcoholic product is a particular product that is a particular addictive product that make people to be addictive towards something, to lose their free will. And when you're saying that, when you're thinking about alcoholic addiction, actually you're not meaning that, you're not necessarily linking that word towards a physical product. you're linking towards a mental addictive proposition. So you've already clarified your thought in your later proposal. There's two kinds of addiction.
So do you agree with the first one then?
I don't agree with the first one because I think there's no existence of physical corporeal materials, and therefore I agree with the second. Then every time when you are using...
Is this a metaphysical position? Are you talking about idealism now?
Oh, some kind of... No, it's not necessarily linked to that part. I'm saying that why I think it is not possible for you to even escape from a particular addictive product is because the particular addictive material eventually is a reflection of your spiritual addictive need. And that need you can never escape from. It will always to be physicalized in one way or another. Will be physicalized yesterday in alcoholic products. It will be physicalized today.
Don't you think, even if we accept this talk in spiritual terms, don't you think that that addiction pathway, I guess you're talking about, is a sort of defect which can be healed, and you can move away from it? You think that's not possible? If you're more enlightened and everything, do you think the Buddha was addicted to anything? I don't know.
I would be very skeptical if anyone could be enlightened like that.
That's an interesting counterpoint, actually.
Oh, well, yes, and on the other hand, maybe a happy fool is also a non-addictive fool, and I don't think happy fool has free will.
Right, so, I get what you mean, but what does that have to do with what you were saying?
You're pointing there's two hypothetical scenarios. The one scenario is life in utopia. Someone is enlightened and has full knowledge of.
Did you say enlightened utopia?
Yes, like an hypothetical scenario. Someone who's escaped from those spiritual addictive needs. And you said, well, it is possible for people to go to that utopia. But of course it's possible. It's even possible to form a communist country or communist society. But yes, it's only a theoretical possibility. And I think all the practice has been determined as a failure. And thank God Philip is not even.
You were saying it was impossible, though. So it is actually possible.
You can say everything is possible.
I think we're getting a bit bogged down in this discussion. Not everything is possible. A square circle is impossible. 1 + 1 is 3 is impossible. What do you mean?
I would say
I'm a bit confused about where the discussion is going.
Oh no! Let's go back to the addictive products and relate to free will. and William is saying that there's a higher. What I'm saying that humanity is in the middle, and William is proposing that. Well, you can jump to a higher hierarchies and you can know things, escape from addictive needs, and, well, you can be cured.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm understanding you here, but I think I probably would agree with humanity's in the middle or whatever, but I think the higher realm is possible, It's achievable. It's achievable. To get to.
And what I'm thinking then, you can go to a lower degree, that is a happy fool. A happy fool has no knowledge of anything at all. Yeah. He's not addictive towards anything because he's a happy fool.
Okay. Yeah.
Then what's the difference between an enlightened,
like a baby?
Well, like a baby, yes. Let's say like a baby.
An animal. Yeah, for sure.
Then what's the difference between a baby and a escaped people from addictive needs?
Well, one is clearly different to the other, in that it's. What do you mean? They're clearly very different. One, I guess, if we want to talk about the degrees of freedom we were talking about, one is ultimately free, while the other is,
But the judging criteria are all the same. They do the same daily activities. Let's not use the example of a baby.
What? the baby goes gaga goo goo, and the enlightened person meditates and shit.
Well, just a happy fool, and he reads, he eats, he drinks, he sleeps, or she reads, she sleeps, she drinks, she exercises. Just as a enlightened.
Okay, I would say the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the difference is to do with higher order desires. The happy fool is fulfilling his base desires, his first order desires, I suppose. He feels the need to eat, he eats. He feels the need to read, he reads. But there's no sort of higher level ultimate desire, which I think, if we're talking about the enlightened person, would be achieving. So ultimately, while it seems like the content fool is kind of free in the sense that he's doing everything that he wants to do, which is, of course, one of the most basic definitions of freedom, we can actually say that he's not actually doing what he wants to do. He's only doing what he wants to do in the sense of first order desires, but he lacks the higher order volitions. So he's actually not free in that sense, whereas the enlightened person is free.
I need to say two things. One, sorry, my phone is going to be dead, and it's because I'm using 5G to join this meeting. And well, maybe I think if you have desire, then you have addiction. It's not possible for you to have desire without addiction, and therefore I reject your proposal. There's no difference between higher desire and lower.
That's very Buddhist, but even the Buddhists will say that there is an enlightened state you can reach, and that state is actually freedom from desire. So slightly different spin on it, but still the same concept, more or less.
Maybe I need to join you guys with a laptop and with a shabby Wi-Fi, because yes, my phone I think is going to be dead in once maybe very soon.
1 minute.
T-minus 1 minute. Well, is desire connected to dopamine hits? I mean, is that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd say definitely. Because with the dopamine hits, I guess when you're expecting the high dopamine spike, you're fooled into having certain desires. Like when I see the tasty carrot cake, I'm kind of fooled. My brain fools me into thinking that is what I want, when ultimately it's against my real desire, which is my higher order desire to, not be a fat ass, a bit more confident with it.
I mean, but is it then? It seems then it's impossible to free yourself from desires because the dopamine is always going to be there, right?
Can you guys hear me? Is there still hello?
Yeah, I don't think there's an echo now.
Okay,
I'm sorry for the disconnection, guys, and hope everything's going well for your podcast. And I disable the use of camera just because the internet will not. I will have better audio qualities.
Fair enough.
It's fine. Yeah. So anyway, you missed a little bit. Ethan was asking me if the presence of dopamine spikes that changes our desires, and I was saying that it does ultimately, because your brain sort of fools you with the dopamine into changing your desires. So when I see a tasty carrot cake, my brain will trick me into thinking that eating the carrot cake is what I actually desire. Whereas in reality, that is not what I desire, because it goes against my higher order desire to, be in shape and be healthy. And then Ethan asked me a question, which was
because you have because the dopamine is always going to be there. The dopamine hits. Then can you really free yourself from desires completely?
Yeah, I think so. So. Well, this is kind of the interesting thing, because dopamine doesn't make you act. It only makes certain actions more desirable, I suppose. You can always resist the dopamine in a sense. And I mean, this still doesn't mean that we can assign personal and moral responsibility to people who are addicted, because of course they're less responsible in a sense. But as I said, it's not binary, right? This goes back to it. they're less responsible than they would be if they weren't addicted, obviously. But I think it's fair to say they're responsible to a certain degree, not enough to which I'd classify them as responsible as we talk about it in the ordinary sense, but to a certain degree. And I think since that degree of agency is still there, it's certainly possible to, I guess, resist the temptation.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit hard to see how you develop this logical argument, because you said eventually addiction is towards your dopamine production, is not towards the addictive desire or addictive activities. Is that
sure,
right?
Sure. So the activities are addictive because of the dopamine spike. Yeah.
So you can reject the addictive activities.
You can reject what the dopamine spike makes you do, right? So dopamine rewards behavior, so it doesn't compel behavior.
See, that's probably why I would reject that desire has a necessary correlation to addiction, because I think in my mind addiction has more to do with like instantaneous desires.
There's still desire of a kind. That's what I was saying with first order and second order desires, but I think that's still desires of a kind. And I mean, I think this actually gets into acrasia, so weakness of the will, I guess. This is more of a phenomenological question, I guess. I don't know how much experience we all have with being addicted, but I suppose the question would be, in the moment that you give in to your temptations, how much of the time is it that you're convinced that that is what you want to do, and then it's only afterwards you realize, okay, I didn't actually want to do that, I was tricked, blah, blah, blah. Or is it, you're giving into the temptation, and as you're doing that, even while you're doing it, you still think like, this is not what I want to do, but you still go and do it.
Right. Because
the first is obviously a case of the second is a case of accuracy, actually. The first is just kind of being deluded, I suppose, I mean, that's a bit of a harsh word, being tricked.
For those who are unfamiliar with the term accuracy, can you briefly explain?
So yeah, it's accuracy is weakness of the will, as I was saying. So it's just the idea that you do things that you kind of don't want to do. That's not the optimal course of action. That aren't good. So I mean, I guess the carrot cake example fits pretty well in here. I mean, the idea is, I know that it's not good for me to eat the carrot cake, but yet I eat it anyway. That's seemingly, it's a case of accuracy. I mean, it applies well to moral behavior as well. I know I shouldn't steal this money, but then I do it. All this stuff.
I mean, let's say you eat the carrot cake, without thinking about, is it good, without the knowledge of, is it good or bad for me? You enjoy it, and then the second time around, you have you know both that you enjoy it, and that it tastes good, and that it's bad for you. Does the knowledge of the fact that it tastes good have any sway in your deliberation, or is it still a case of akrasia because you know that it's bad for you? Like, could you say that the fact that you know that it tastes good be in some sense a qualifying or as it being in some way good for you because the taste is good?
Well, I think we've got to be careful here because two slightly separate examples. So if, say, I choose to eat the carrot cake despite judging that not eating the carrot cake is the healthier choice, then, that's like unremarkable. That's pretty normal. I just don't care that much about my health, I assess that eating the carrot cake is the better course of action. What's weird is if you kind of actually do value your health and think that you shouldn't eat the carrot cake, so I eat the carrot cake, even though I was convinced that not eating the carrot cake was the better thing to do, all things considered. That's would be a case of acrosia. Whereas the first one is like pretty unremarkable. I just judge one course of action to be better when accounting for everything.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm not quite sure whether I'm a little bit lost in your carrot cake example, but I believe it's because you're using a very moderate example instead of using cocaine or other very
Sure. I mean, the same thing applies arguable. To cocaine. I can choose to take cocaine despite knowing that it's bad for my health, but I think it's the better thing to do, all things considered. That's certainly possible. Versus I do the cocaine even though I know it's the worst thing to do, all things considered.
What about cases where you stumble upon, a white substance, you don't know what it is, probably you think I shouldn't try this, but you're unsure about what it is exactly, so you try it. Is that a case of acrosia?
Well, it depends. I mean, in that case, you're an idiot, first of all. But I mean, I think again, it depends on what you judge at the moment. If in the moment you judge that it's a better course of action to just leave it alone, and then you still do it, then that's a case of acrosia. If you think like it might be bad, but it's still worth trying, and you take it anyway, then that's not really acrosia.
So it really depends.
Isn't it true? Yes.
So are you saying that acrosia really depends on you have to have the knowledge or judge beforehand that doing such an action would produce a worse condition, and you do it anyway?
Yeah. Definitely, it depends on like the higher order desires that you have, and that's not to like excuse certain things and say that things are okay to do if you don't have the higher order desire, but that would just be a lack of knowledge in that case.
I found this acrosia argument is very, very it's not very convincing, at least for me, because on the one hand it points out the separation between slavery and master. And one man could be a slavery of something else, and one could master himself knowledge or his self-desire. And
sorry, what do you mean by this acrosia argument? Do you think the concept of acrosia is incorrect? Because, I mean, you wouldn't be alone there. Socrates famously denied the existence of acrosia. Or do you think that acrosia, as it relates to addiction, is an incorrect characterization? Because that's also a position. As I was saying before, there are kind of two different ways you can be addicted. And if
I would say the kind of the kind of what? Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah.
What?
You said sorry for the. You were speaking, and then you said sorry for the interruption, and then you stopped speaking.
Oh! I thought William is not finished. Then.
No. Speak.
I'm thinking about to say that, like the carrot cake, you either don't have the full knowledge of the damage of the carrot cake, or you don't know the damage of the carrot cake, and therefore you lack the power to constrain or contain your desire and your activity, and that ataraxia leads to apraxia, I think. Ataraxia, A-T or
That's
A-K?
Another term. Ataraxia is another term. That's the
it's sincere
Epicurian, tranquility.
Yes. Yeah. How and acrasia or I need to look at
acrasia.
Acrasia. Okay, acrasia. I think by itself the term presupposes there's a separation of use of power and non-use of power. And if there's a power and there's a use of power and non-use of power, then there's slavery and government. And therefore, it's either... So by the using of this term, you're already supposing that for some human beings, they can't escape from addiction. And therefore, for some human beings, they can't have free will. It's just pointing out that some human beings are better than others. It's some kind of hegemony.
Again, you didn't really answer my question. Are you arguing against the existence of acrasia, or are you arguing that acrasia is not relevant in cases of addiction?
I'm arguing for the first one. Because
that acrasia does not exist.
I think to argue acrasia is only a tautology to say something is identical towards itself.
What?
Wait. Ataraxia, not acra. I need to read acrasia. Yes, akrasia. Acrasia. You're using this term to say. Wait, I'm even lost by myself. Never mind. It's a silly argument.
Socrates did argue against the existence of acrasia famously, but I think generally it's an uphill battle, and I think Aristotle after that sort of provides a good account of acrasia, which I think disputes that. I mean, Socrates' reasoning isn't completely wrong, because it is a very bizarre concept, acrasia, right? Like, how can you judge something to be a less than better choice and still do it, right? You don't willingly choose to do something evil, willingly choose to do something wrong, which is clearly what it is.
I was just going to say the counter argument, as you're saying, right, is just that Socrates would say, if you have knowledge of what is good, then you can't do wrong.
Yeah, but I think Aristotle speaks of, kind of solves this issue in a certain way, I guess, by, drawing a distinction between, desires and beliefs are different things. So you can believe something is wrong, but is different from your desire. The belief is going to be purely rational, whereas the desire and consequently the action, because obviously desire affects action, is going to be also irrational. So you can do something that is irrational, which is not the best thing to do. And that would be a case of acrasia.
I guess the only argument, the Socratic argument you can make against acrasia in the case of like addiction, like cocaine and heroin or whatever, anything else, is you could say maybe you have knowledge that particular thing is not good, but the knowledge that you don't have necessarily is how exactly that will impact your life going forward, and how addicted you will get to that particular substance based on trying it one time, and how that will impact your life in the long term going forward, if that makes sense. Like, you may know that the substance is bad for you in the short term, but you might think, it's bad for me, I know that, but I'm not, I'll just try it once and then stop. You may not know that going forward in, 20 years on or 5 years on, you'll still be addicted to this thing and be unable to stop, and how exactly it will impact your life. And maybe if you had like a magic, ball or a crystal ball and could see exactly how you trying it that one time.
Acrasia would take effect when you're already addicted. It wouldn't be the case for like a first time. What you're saying with the case you're using for the first time you try something, that's more to do with like lack of knowledge. I'd say that is for acrasia. You don't judge like another part would be better because you lack the knowledge to be able to judge it in the first place.
I see.
It's more about when you're already addicted and you judge, I shouldn't take this cocaine, and you do it anyway. Whether that's a case of acrasia or not, it is actually disputable, because again, from the phenomenology of addiction, it seems like sometimes it isn't necessarily weakness of will. It's, that certainly is the case in some cases, but probably not all the time.
But that's the interesting question, right? Is when does the addiction begin? Like, for a certain substance, like, is it when you first try it? Is it when you have that initial spike? Is it when you try it the second time? Like, when does that addiction actually start?
It's going to be virtually impossible to pinpoint an exact point, but I guess it'll be more or less when your brain like adapts to expect the expect the dopamine spike as habitually, sort of.
Well, I guess I would my argument would be that it starts when the akrasia starts, when you know that you shouldn't do something, and you know that you shouldn't do this thing, but you do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Then,
I mean, that to me seems like a pretty good starting point for the addiction.
I mean, I think you can still be addicted without akrasia, though. Say, like, you judge each time that it's the correct thing to do, but you're just like, you're wrong. Your brain is still like wired in a certain way, which kind of forces you to take the drug. Again,
I guess that's true.
Used a bit liberally here, but yeah.
So that would be a case where you know, you think that taking that taking the drug like cocaine or whatever, or the opioid, you think, in the case of like prescription medicine, you think it's actually good for you.
You think the decision to do that was yours. It was from your own free will and everything, but you're actually wrong about that. It was caused by blah blah neurons in the brain, whatever you want, addiction stuff.
Mm. So you can be addicted without knowing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Because you have like social media where you just are like not really conscious of the fact that you're scrolling or doing all this stuff, but that can still constitute an addiction to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, realizing you're addicted is, as I was saying before, is the first step to being not addicted. I think it's certainly possible to be addicted without really knowing it. I mean, you'll see the ramifications of the addictions like popping up here and there. You'll just be tired all the time. You won't have energy. You'll feel a bit like worse because of the constant spikes of dopamine you're getting. You'll feel yourself unable to concentrate and focus on stuff. But you won't necessarily be able to link that to the fact that your dopamine receptors are fried, from the addiction. Yeah. Certainly when you make the connection, then that's the first step to, I guess, getting rid of it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Shit, are you in like a tunnel or something?
Yes, I agree with Philip. And I agree with William. Gosh.
They don't look anything alike to me.
Yeah, a little bit different.
A little bit different.
But they're both brilliant students and very enlightened.
Oh, well, thank you. You too, Anshin.
Anshin, do you think, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is too personal of a question, but like, what do you think is
please.
The most, you were talking before about, addictions that we're not really conscious of. Like before, things like opioids or cocaine or heroin were used as, prescriptions, and we didn't really know that they were like addictive. Do you think, what would you say that there's today that we're not really aware of as an addictive thing that people are addicted to?
Is that a personal question?
Well, I changed it because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to.
Okay. No, I was thinking that for some very, very strange question, and I was thinking to prepare my answer in order to respond to your question. But yes, please, what's your question again? Because I was thinking about the shocking part, and therefore I ignore the normal part. It's more like I'm fully concentrated in the non-existent things, and therefore I lost.
Well, it was kind of a stupid question, but it was just you mentioned that before in the past, things like heroin, people didn't know that they were addictive substances and they just used them as medicine. So do you think there's anything today, and if so, what possible things today do we do that we don't know are addictive, that we'll later find out in like 50 years or so, 50 or 100 years that are actually addictive?
That's a very general question, and I would say I can't foresee the future. But if you just let me to take a wild guess, probably the first thing that jumps into my mind is university degree, and maybe I'm thinking that some academic training is more like a
addictive content, and
damn, well, I wish I
have
were
some
addicted to
side.
my uni degree. That would be
Yeah, me
that would
too.
be a lot better.
It may have some side effects on others, and people haven't been aware of. Of course,
Maybe
side.
we'll put a poll of this in the description and see what people think.
What about you, William? What would you think?
So something that's not really considered an addiction now, which will be considered an addiction in the future. I mean, I don't know how well accepted even now, social media addiction is. It is kind of spoken about, and some people implicitly accept it or not. But I think the extent to how much it has affected the population is kind of gone under the radar. I think social media and internet in general, and even video games, people will constantly deny that video games are addictive and everything. And hey, I like my video game as much as the next random person, but there are people who are certainly addicted to video games. I mean, video games are also designed to be addictive as possible, with all the levels and the rewards and everything. It's made to, squeeze as much dopamine out of your receptors as possible. So these are the kind of the modern addictions, I guess, that we're already starting to realize are addictions, but we're still pretty early on in assessing the threat that they are, I guess.
I just found it funny thing that, if I may just say so, something that is maybe not very, very relevant to things. Maybe I'm thinking the use of addiction sounds like some kind of people in exile use addiction as a weapon in order to fight against the people in government. And there's really no way to determine either something is addictive or not. If someday later people find tobacco products and alcoholic products or even cocaine is beneficial for human health one way or another, then maybe someday we have some machine could replace parts of our body, even part of our organ, and people discovered once some part of our body is replaced by machines, and cocaine is beneficial for our body in that form, and then cocaine will be listed as a non-addictive product. And what if one way we all have this machine?
Something to be addictive, it seems to be a necessary component that it's not good for you. If cocaine were good for you, then sure, it wouldn't be addictive. But sure.
By the way,
isn't it only? Yes,
I was going to say my answer to the previous question about substances that are addiction would be rhetoric.
Rhetoric.
That's an enlightened take. Maybe a bit more than 100 years to get to that. But yeah, I can sort of see that. I mean,
things like people like populist candidates and speeches and people just.
Well, it's sort of like not necessarily rhetoric, but the thing that comes to mind when you talk about popular speeches and stuff is sort of this addiction to hating stuff, outrage, I guess. You're like kind of it's enjoyable to be outraged and to be angry at certain things,
Could you generalize that more to like victimhood?
Well, yeah, I think that sort of feeds into it. If you have this worldview where you're constantly, kind of the conspiracy worldview, where you're constantly under attack and the whole world is conspiring to attack you. Every day you just wake up and there's some news which is like, see what they're doing, they're damaging our souls. They changed the new M&M mascots. How could they? Something like that.
Well, I mean, I think I know people who are like, seem like they're addicted to that mentality. I mean,
sure.
I definitely can think of people who I know in my life who. It's kind of like an addiction because that's all they can do. That's all that they're focused on. Just 24/7 is like that kind of. Somebody's out to get me.
Yeah, it's like you see news of information and like, whoa, your brain goes, whoa, nice. You get the validation, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, we're 1 hour 46 minutes. Good length.
Pretty good. Yeah. Anshin, do you have any concluding thoughts to add?
I've already said maybe addiction is only a word for people in exile to use against the people in power.
Okay. I don't really know what that means, but
yeah. Well, for me, I guess it's addiction's a very important topic, which we all need to introspect. Everybody thinks they're not addicted to things, but I think everybody should genuinely take time in their lives to introspect, and I recommend journaling. That's a very good habit, which kind of journaling, just journaling in general.
Yeah.
Keeping a journal, yeah. It kind of makes you dissociate a bit and see yourself in the third person. Judge you by how you do, which is ultimately a reflection on how you think, even though you may think you have privileged access to your own mind, so only you know what you're thinking and how you behave. That's, completely wrong. You have to be skeptical of your own mind at all times. That's what I've got to say.
Well, that was very well said, and I think this is a topic that we should and will talk about more. Because there's definitely a lot more to get into. As usual, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button. We just hit 100 subscribers on Spotify, so
great. Yeah, baby.
Now we have now we have a lot more to go. But yeah, this was a pleasure. We'll keep it going. Like I said, I'm going to try to do this more often. Have some actually, I'll leave this for the off-camera stuff, but anyway, yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you for listening, and thank you, William and Anshan, and we will see you next time.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Aspen.
Have a beautiful day.
All right. Guys, stay on just 1 second after, because I want to ask you about something.